For Juan Sturgis Boston, urban living holds a story of pain and separation. His grandparents migrated from Southern Virginia to Baltimore in the 1920s and 30s. As for many Native Americans, his family's urban assimilation involved the forcible separation from their ancestral lands and culture. But he says that a life defined by poverty and neglect is much worse for Native Americans in rural areas.
If you get away from the urban communities into some of the reservation communities, they are extremely poor communities. Healthcare is horrible. Living conditions are bad. It's disease is rampant. It's amazing how some Native people live here in the United States.
It's the historic and ongoing denial of their culture that continues to fuel inequality for many Native Americans like Juan. That drive to erase the past, he says, is rooted in colonial attitudes, a legacy America still hasn't come to terms with.
To successfully conquer a people, you need to erase their culture, erase their past, completely obliterate it. And that systematically has been done by the Western European, by the US government, and it continues today.
Erasing and ignoring Native American culture has had real-world consequences. Many accuse the US government of ignoring the environmental impact of extractive industries on native land, the plight of missing and murdered Indigenous women across the United States, and educational disparities among Native students also went disregarded for years, which is why, against this backdrop, the success of the vaccine rollout has represented a tribal victory, especially for the Navajo Nation, which has even sent emergency medical equipment to India.
The vaccines that we received here on the Navajo Nation, over 200,000, 91% of what we receive have gone into the arms of our Navajo citizens.
There are hopes, too, that a change of administration has brought more inclusivity with the appointment of the country's first Native Cabinet Secretary.
She is a shining example that Native people are involved in the direction of this country and what's happening, and that she's championing Indigenous issues at one of the absolute highest levels possible.
Secretary Deb Haaland believes one way to address inequality is to reinforce Native sovereignty. In an atmosphere where a high-profile Republican was able to challenge the place of Native Americans in American culture, the debate over sovereignty is highly charged. This administration wants to put Native Americans in charge of their own land, and it wants the federal government to hand over decision-making over private land ownership to regional Native leaders. But change cannot be tokenistic, say community leaders, who are demanding an end to the denial of their culture.
It's not the home of the free. It's not what land of the brave, home of the free, all that other stuff. That's, as far as Native people are concerned, is anything but.
As the US considers how to address racial injustice, Native Americans are clear that after years of neglect, it's time they are included in that conversation. Jagruti, CGTN, Washington.